There's a growing awareness of the need to help protect our pollinators. And with this growing awareness, more and more people are planting pollinator and butterfly-friendly gardens in their own yards. So today we're talking to Master Gardener, Catherine Wells, about how easy it is to do just that. So Catherine, how easy is it?
Tyler, it's super easy to create your own pollinator garden, and whether you have a large elaborate space or a really small simple space, there are two key ingredients to keep in mind. So first of all, you need to choose your plants, and secondly, you need a place to plant those plants. And so let's talk about the plants first. Generally, it's best to choose Texas native perennials or self-seeding annuals. They're best for the environment, best for your pocketbook. And then as far as the location, you want a sunny spot, because even though some of our Texas natives bloom in shade or part shade, butterflies are cold-blooded insects, and so they really need the warmth of the sun. And then a third ingredient that is optional, but I think is very beneficial, is to have a small puddling station. So naturally, butterflies do need water and nutrients in addition to the nectar that they get from the blossoms, and they find that in shallow puddles on the ground. So you can create and replicate that in your own garden by using a shallow bowl. A shallow plant saucer works really well. You just fill that with a mix of sand and soil, put enough water in there to make it puddly, and then if you add a few rocks in there, pebbles, that gives the butterflies a place to rest while they're getting the nourishment they need from the puddling station.
So if somebody doesn't have, space to build a whole new separate garden just for the butterflies, are these things that can be incorporated as part of their existing landscape?
They absolutely can, and that's a great question because not everybody has an expansive space to create this. So you can even replicate sort of a potted pocket pollinator garden on a patio or a balcony or a small area of your yard. You can even do it in pots. Now if you plant it in pots, you want to keep an eye on the moisture, because of course if they're in pots they're going to dry out a little bit faster, and so you want to make sure they get the water that they need. And I'd also say to choose a sunny spot for that, as we mentioned earlier,
right,
and then cluster them together so that the butterflies don't expend a lot of energy trying to fly from place to place. They can just have their little buffet all right in one area.
Nice. So, as we all know, there are a lot of options when it comes to plants for pollinators, but we're going to talk specifically about a few that might be good for here in North Texas. So what do we have here, Catherine?
Well, absolutely. Let's look at a few things, and as we're doing that, we just want to say, keep in mind that when you're choosing whatever will work best for your garden, to stagger bloom time. So one thing you'll want to look at is when the plants bloom, because ideally it's good to have something in bloom all year long,
right,
especially from early spring to late fall. So try to choose plants so you've got at least something in bloom all the time. And then the other thing when you're actually planting them is to group like-minded plants together. So for example, we've got buttonbush here, which is a wonderful Texas native, but in the natural it grows along stream banks and bodies of water, so it's a moisture-loving plant. So you're going to want to plant that with like-minded things in your yard where you get a lot of moisture or where you have a lot of supplemental irrigation.
Right.
Contrary to that, a lot of the plants over here are the sun-loving plants. Well, they're all sun-loving plants, although this one can do well in part shade too.
These are the drier guys.
They are.
Yeah.
These are the drier guys, and they can withstand the heat and the drought and the dry soil, and they include, Tyler's brought these lovely selections today, a Blackfoot daisy, which is a wonderful low-growing perennial. It doesn't like to be watered, and so it really thrives in that hot, dry. You could plant that along with Salvia farinaceae. This is the white sport, which is called Augusta Dulberg. Her husband is Henry Dulberg, and he's kind of a purpley blue color.
Nice.
But they kind of like the same conditions. These will grow taller, and so these are a good backdrop for the Blackfoot daisy. And then another thing that Tyler brought today is the Texas native lantana, which kind of is a yellowy orangey color, and that also likes the same conditions. I'd say when you go to the nurseries to try not to choose the common lantanas or the cultivars. They don't do as well as our Texas native lantana.
Right.
And then back over to the watery things again. She's also got purple coneflower, which is the Echinacea purpurea, and then Greg's mistflower, which is the Conoclinium gregii, and they can do well in part shade, full sun, and they're kind of the middle of the road plants where if they get a little bit of water, that's fine. They're good all-around plantings. This Greg's mistflower will actually stay in bloom from March until November. So if you're looking for something that really will last throughout the spring to the fall, that's a good choice. And I'm sure you've seen in the fall, the queen butterflies really love to nectar on the Greg's mistflower.
Yeah, they do. I've seen monarchs on these guys as well. So one more thing when we're talking about butterfly gardening, I've heard a lot of talk about nectar plants versus host plants. So all of these guys that we have here are nectar plants, right, and provide for the food needs of butterflies. Can you tell us a little bit about host plants and why those are important?
That's an excellent question, because everybody loves the spectacular show of the adult butterflies, but for the whole life cycle to be completed, those guys, when they're little caterpillars, need host plants to eat, to store all that energy to turn into those beautiful butterflies. And so some people don't like the host plants as much because they get eaten. But just to give you a couple of examples, I'm sure you've probably heard Tyler mention the monarchs. Milkweeds, the Asclepias and species within that genus, are the host plant for the monarch butterflies. Some other ones that you might be familiar with in our area, our native passion flower vine is the host plant for our Gulf fritillary butterflies, and then there's a whole bunch of other examples of that as well. So if you want to be able to support the whole life cycle of the butterfly, you want to include some of those host plants. Dill, for example, is a host plant for the eastern black swallowtail. And everybody likes dill as an herb, so that's an easy thing to add. And if you don't like the way it looks when it gets gobbled on, you can kind of hide it among the blooming plants. Or if you enjoy that process and you want to educate other people about it, you can just leave them right out in the open and enjoy the show.
Great. And I will say one thing about host plants is some of the caterpillars themselves are interesting. Like the caterpillar for the Gulf fritillary is a gorgeous caterpillar. So you are getting a little bit of a show even just using host plants.
You absolutely are. And if I can just add one more thing, one thing to keep in mind too when you're thinking about the whole life cycle of the butterfly is that a lot of our butterflies lay their eggs in fallen leaf litter, and they overwinter and they pupate under that cover, that little bed of leaves. And so, for example, the red-banded hairstreak is one of those in our area that lays its eggs under oaks and sumacs and one other tree that I can't remember right now. So if you can, before you rake it or bag it or blow it or even compost it, consider leaving some of that leaf litter on the ground to help support that part of the life cycle.
Right. Awesome. And just like with any other native plantings or pollinator plantings, you want to eliminate and reduce pesticide use for these guys, right? Because that'll affect the caterpillars and the butterflies too.
That is so important to remember. Yeah. We do want to eliminate or at least greatly reduce your use of pesticides because they don't discriminate between what you might consider a pest and our sweet little caterpillars that turn into the magnificent butterflies.
So as you can see, building a butterfly garden in your own yard really is just that easy. For more resources, you can visit flower-mound.com and check out the Environmental Services tab. Thanks for joining us.